They strutted onto podiums with starched suits and fiery speeches, but behind the polished smiles, the cracks were already showing. Governors who once thundered about defiance now found themselves staring at the unthinkable, the prospect of federal troops stepping into their backyards. Cameras caught the sweat glistening at their temples, the forced laughter that couldn't hide the tremor in their voices. To the public, they projected certainty. Privately, aides whispered a frantic phone. Calls, legal teams scrambling, and strategy memos rewritten in midnight panic. The stage was set for a collision between swagger and reality, between those clinging to power through bluster and the steady hand of a government unwilling to blink. This was no longer just rhetoric. It was a test of will, a clash with consequences that could reverberate far beyond party lines. But the panic behind closed doors was far more dramatic than anything they dared show to cameras. One by one, the governors lined up before cameras, voices sharp and fists clenched, as if volume could substitute for strategy. They thundered about states' rights, promising that no outsider would ever dictate terms to their people. The words dripped with defiance, rehearsed sound bites crafted to echo through conservative talk shows and viral clips. They cast themselves as guardians of freedom, daring Washington to test their resolve. To their supporters, it was theater meant to inspire. To the rest of the nation, it was arrogance masquerading as strength. But look closer, and the performance falters. The rehearsed pauses stretch too long, the smiles freeze just a little too wide. The hero in this story, the steady constitutional authority of the federal government, doesn't need shouting to be heard. It is calm, patient, measured, unshaken by bluster, and that contrast cuts deep. The louder the governors roared about defiance, the clearer their fear became. It wasn't conviction driving their words, but panic dressed up as pride. They knew that if troops were deployed, their grandstanding could collapse in an instant, exposing how fragile their defiance truly was. Yet behind that steel-jawed bravado, aides whispered about the storm about to hit. Away from the podiums and flashing cameras, the bravado crumbled. Behind closed doors, the same governors who had pounded fists in public now leaned over long mahogany tables. Voices lowered, eyes darting, each sentence weighted with unease. Staffers shuffled binders across the room, briefing charts outlining the unthinkable, what a federal troop deployment would actually mean. Legal teams warned of constitutional dead ends, political. Strategists cautioned that their fiery speeches might backfire if the deployment went forward. Suddenly, the swagger that looked so firm on television melted into a chorus of second-guessing. Whispers filled the halls. Who among them would stand their ground, and who would quietly fold? Some argued they had to double down, raise the rhetoric even higher. Others begged for restraint, fearing a public backlash that could end careers. The governors' alliances fractured under the weight of looming reality, each one imagining the headlines if troops rolled across their states. In private, they admitted what they never dared say aloud. The performance was unsustainable. There, audiences expected warriors, but in truth they were cornered politicians, scrambling for a way out of a trap they had set for themselves. The room smelled of stale coffee and quiet dread as the gap between their public defiance and private despair grew wider by the hour. And when news leaked of a possible deployment order, their entire strategy collapsed overnight. The story burst out of the shadows and into the headlines, igniting a frenzy that no press secretary could contain. Cable news anchors replayed the governor's defiant speeches, but this time the tone was different. Side-by-side comparisons exposed the cracks. Bold proclamations at the microphone paired with whispers of panic in private. The contradiction became impossible to ignore. Social media erupted. Hashtags mocking their bravado trended. For days, while viral clips captured governors stumbling through evasive answers under the heat of relentless questioning. Memes spread like wildfire. Images of stern faces melting into nervous glances. Captions asking, "Still so tough now?" Op-eds thundered across editorial pages, framing the moment not as defiance, but as desperation. Millions of Americans weren't buying the tough talk. They saw the cracks. They saw leaders who had built entire careers on swagger suddenly blinking in the face of accountability for immigrant families, young activists, and voters who had long felt dismissed by this brand of politics. It was validation. The mask had slipped, and the world could see what lay beneath. Inside their camps, panic spread faster than any news cycle. Calls between governors turned tense, with some urging a united front, others privately seeking distance. What was meant to project strength had instead revealed division. And the more they tried to patch over the fractures, the more glaring those fractures became under the national spotlight. And then came the moment none of them could spin away. The breaking point came not with a speech, but with a slip. Leaked recording, just 30 seconds long, captured one of the loudest governors whispering to an aide that troop deployment would be a disaster we can't afford. The words cut through the noise like a blade. The man who had thundered about never backing down was suddenly exposed, his fear preserved on tape for the entire country to hear. Within hours, the clip spread across networks and timelines, racking up millions of views. Commentators pounced, contrasting the trembling voice in private with the chest-thumping bravado on stage. For the first time, the mask slipped completely. Their panic was no longer rumor, it was undeniable truth. Meanwhile, the federal response stood in stark contrast. Calm, measured statements reaffirmed constitutional authority, projecting steadiness while governors flailed in damage control. The hero towered above the villains, not with shouting, but with quiet certainty. The balance of power had shifted. What happened in the aftermath left the nation stunned. In the days that followed, the bluster that once defined the governors seemed hollow, their credibility cracked open by their own words. Editorial boards called it a lesson in the limits of performative politics. Polls reflected a shift. Americans weary of endless theatrics gravitated toward steadiness, toward leaders who did not need to shout to be believed. On social media, ordinary people celebrated the revelation. Posts from immigrant families, young voters, and long dismissed voices carried a single refrain. Finally, the truth came through. What endured was not the roar of defiance, but the quiet power of accountability. Federal leadership, calm and constitutional, stood taller in contrast, reminding the nation that dignity is not weakness and truth is not fragile. The governors had gambled on fear. The people chose steadiness. In the end, the panic revealed a deeper truth. Justice and Americanness are not built on arrogance, but on the resolve to outlast it.